Live everywhere.
Daily Kos Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Waldman. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Thursday, June. We're getting ahead of ourselves. June 1st. I knew it was a new month, and I forgot which one it was. It was one of the J months. It's not January, not cold enough. June 1st, 2017. Made it through another month. Don't know whether we should reward ourselves for that or not. Plenty in the news today, of course. Refrigerator not repaired, as you may have heard yesterday, and so we're waiting another 2 weeks on that one. Time to give up, I guess. Eventually it'll get done, and boy, will we have a party when that happens. It takes up an awful lot of your morning to have to do all this other crazy stuff. Lots of interesting developments today. Greg Dworkin already has, what do we have, like 15 stories queued up, ready to go. Fantastic. That will get us through the better part of the first hour of today's program. Thanks again to Greg and Armando for carrying us through our refrigerator, well, not repair day yesterday, but every once in a while you gotta wing it and see what you can come up with in tough circumstances. Lots happening today, lots of Trump news, of course, and wow, increasingly it becomes impossible to identify which are the most outrageous Trump stories of the day, which of course is sort of by design. I mean, I guess certainly the one with the largest impact on everything, because planet, will be Trump's announcement of his intention to withdraw from the Paris Accords. That's sort of old news. He's been threatening that since forever, but now he's, I guess, officially getting around to doing that. I guess the other sort of, I don't know what, most fundamentally the disconcerting news is the report that he has, well, basically he's caved to the Russians who not long ago, I don't think we all took note of it, but not long ago threatened some sort of retaliation against us for our retaliation under the Obama administration against their having undermined and attacked the American electoral process in 2016. Speaking here of the, well, what did they do? What would you call this? It wasn't a confiscation per se, but a forced closure of two Russian-owned installations, the most famous of which was the sort of mansion on the eastern shore of Maryland, which by many accounts they had been using as a base for for all of their operations, which would include their spy operations, of course, since that's pretty much what they do while they're here in the United States. More interesting spy stories out there as well. But some time ago, let's see, we got the tweet here. The official Russian Twitter account, and I can't believe we're really at the point where we actually have such things, but the official Russian Twitter account apparently had sent this out. What's the date on this one? May 23rd. So not all that long ago. Russia is seeking to return its diplomatic property in the U.S., actually seeking the return of its diplomatic property. Even their official Russian, this is the Russian Embassy USA Twitter account is written by bots. Anyway, Russia is actually seeking the return of its diplomatic property in the U.S. as soon as possible. Otherwise, we will have to take countermeasures, which is frankly a rather weird tweet for the Russian Embassy, I guess, to put out. I guess it's weird for any Russian entity to put it out at all because, of course, it's an open threat to the United States. But hey, they love to do that. I would have maybe put that out through the official Russia Twitter account rather than the embassy Twitter account, but I can't nitpick about that one. But basically, it sounds like Trump has pretty much agreed to that, and it was really something I think he was contemplating doing earlier. So maybe he feels he's already past this stage. But I guess the most incredible thing about this to me is, as I tweeted this morning, it's amazing that Trump can't even bring himself to send the message to Putin or to the Russian embassy, whoever it is he wants to communicate with. Okay, I agree with you. I think it should also be returned to you, but just not right now. The optics of it are just that terrible. I mean, it's really just about the most egregious timing I could think of. And he couldn't say, I get you, you have a point, I have domestic pressures to deal with. You see how much difficulty I'm having. I thought my troubles with Russia were over when I fired Comey, as I told you when you visited the Oval Office, but it seems things are a little bit more difficult, and we're just going to have to move more slowly. But he would not deny the Russians immediate satisfaction, I guess. And, well, I don't know if there's any other way he could make it clearer that he was under their thrall through whatever mechanism. I find it rather amazing that this could happen. And that's not even, like I said, the most amazing thing today. Luckily, we do have Greg, which in itself is an amazing thing. But he's collected all the rest of the amazing stuff to tell us about. Good morning, Greg.
Good morning. I have collected quite a number of things. I think what I'll do, because I have so much stuff there, is I'm going to restart the list at the bottom and post it as I talk about it, making it easier for you to find.
Okay.
Of course, our listeners and readers, the readers will see Scott Anderson's summary later. And the listeners will just hear it as it comes because, it's radio and live, and that's what we do. I'm so sorry about your refrigerator.
Yeah, well.
We've been having all sorts of magical ceremonies here, throwing all sorts of things into the fire and making special smoke out of it and just wishing things would work. But,
well, fire
doesn't work that way.
Well, not for a refrigerator, it doesn't. I would assume we would want to freeze things.
Magic spells are magic spells.
Oh, well, yeah, I guess. All right, it's old school stuff. They didn't have refrigeration. And today's summary will be my own. Scott Anderson off making, I hope, bundles of money today with some additional work.
Oh, that'd be nice.
But yeah, that would be terrific if he became a millionaire. That would be great.
Yeah, it would. So, listen, let me start with the Paris stuff because climate, I think, is hugely important to the planet, and if we do, as planned, wind up in July going off to Iceland for vacation, it'd be nice if the whole place didn't melt, but
yes.
We'll see.
Well, that would be the time for it, but do try to preserve it for us, will you?
Anyway, here's Washington Examiner, David Drucker, who I follow.
Okay.
A little different angle on things. Trump could rally GOP, reward voters with Paris Agreement exit, he supposes. I was chatting with him online. It's not, affirmed this is going to happen. It's just that it might. He says pulling out of the climate accord would also be seen as a reward to Trump country. Voters in industrial states like Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin are rural areas where environmental regulations are viewed as economically harmful. Now, it turns out that in just about all states, people want to stick with the Paris Accords. The polling's pretty clear on that. The intensity isn't. So it's kind of like the gun issue in regard to everybody wants background checks, but that may or may not be the thing that you vote on. But what's interesting here is the way he phrases how it might hit Trump voters. And it's not like I don't care about how it hits the planet, but this is a political broadcast, so, we'll focus on that. Polling on the Paris Agreement, which aims to reduce the negative effects of climate change caused by human activity, is inconsistent, but there's scant evidence Republicans would miss U.S. participation. Trump campaigned on withdrawal, defeating Hillary Clinton, the Democrat who pledged fidelity to it. Even upscale suburban GOP voters, suspicious of Trump and more interested in combating climate change than other Republicans, aren't likely to shed tears over a U.S. pullout from Paris. But the numbers are not, within the own article, are a little different. A HuffPost YouGov opt-in online poll conducted in mid-May found that 61% of Americans said the country should stay, 17% supported withdrawal. That's not a very big number. And 21% were unsure. Only 31% of self-described Trump voters backed Paris, 46% supported exiting, and 22% were unsure. So granted, Trump voters are a little more skeptical about it, but 46% isn't even a majority. And that 22%, I think, are quite subject to persuasion. What's going to happen as we look at other pieces here is that, of course, you have the core voters. Here's a great example of the core voter. And this is Tim Walberg, Republican from Michigan in the House.
Okay, yes.
All right. And his point of view is he told a constituent last week that God can solve the problem of climate change if the global phenomenon truly exists.
Oh, which global phenomenon? God or
I believe this climate change. I think man has some impact. Can man change the entire universe? No. Why do I believe that? Well, as a Christian, I believe, God will take care of it.
Well, I say
the
fight
Lord
global
helps
phenomena
those who
for
help
voters.
themselves. I think he's leaving that part out of it.
Well, they leave so much out.
Right. And then the other part of it here is, and this is Emily Guskin writing in the Washington Post for the bigger picture of the environment. By the numbers, Trump's big environmental regulation rollback is all kinds of unpopular. And when Republicans talk about the idea, and Dave Drucker, when I was talking to him online, said, I talked to a bunch of Republican consultants who really think that this is good for Trump. But by the numbers, Trump's big environmental regulation rollback is all kinds of unpopular. And so is the environmental regulation rollback the same as leaving the Paris Accords? No, but one can be a surrogate for the other in terms of how people view the environment. And they are separate for a number of different reasons that we'll talk about. President Trump has taken steps to erase the Obama administration's environmental record in an effort to buoy the struggling coal industry, but the move risks running afoul of public opinion. With majorities of the public in support of several rules Trump is focused on dismantling. In general, environmental regulations are popular with the public, putting Trump's deregulation at odds with many voters. And even as he's doing all of this, more Americans are concerned about global warming than ever. So, a poll last spring by Yale and George Mason showed 49% of voters said then President Obama should be doing more or much more to address global warming. 20% said he should be doing less or much less. So that's part of it. Other surveys have shown similar results. Quinnipiac found almost 6 in 10 voters saying the U.S. needs to do more to address climate change, compared to 17% who said the country is doing enough and 18% who said the country is doing too much. A March Gallup poll, record high 45% of Americans worried a great deal about global warming, up from 37%. Same poll found record high majority saying most scientists believe global warming is happening, caused by human activity, et cetera, et cetera. And 2 other recent polls show global warming concern at or near its highest levels on record. Quinnipiac's late March poll found 43% of registered voters very concerned. And it just goes on and on and on. So the idea that people don't really care about this, I think, is wrong. And the idea that Trump voters are automatic, oh, well, this is a good idea. Well, the 22% who are most persuadable are probably the white suburban voters who voted for Trump and held their nose to do so. And they're going to see articles about American leadership around the world, which is not necessarily true for the environmental regulations that affect coal country, but will be in terms of the Paris Accord. This one is from Ishan Tharoor from the Washington Post today, for example. And it says, if Trump quits the Paris Climate Accord, he would lead the U.S. into the wilderness.
Oh.
Now, wilderness isn't a great place to be if you're trying to be a leader. And
but it is preserved land, and that's
which you can drill on. Donald J. Trump announced that I'll be announcing my decision on the Paris Accord at I think 3:00 in the Rose Garden. He's going to do one of these big announcements and try to gin up support like he did with the announcement for the Supreme Court nominee.
It's nervy to do that outdoors.
Well, we'll see what the weather's like.
Yeah, he should stay in the air conditioning someplace.
But, Syria and Nicaragua, I think, would be the only other countries that didn't support the Paris Accord. It has to do with investments in clean energy. It has to do with whether or not there's, in fact, American leadership around the world. And what goes with that is this fascinating Matt Bai article in Yahoo News, which let me just give you the link to. Forget Trump's bluster. The world is walking all over him.
Yeah.
And basically, let me give you the highlights. Trump is weak, and our rivals have figured it out.
I am in agreement.
Right? He had a big fight with Germany because not understanding that the EU and not individual countries sets trade policy. He was assailing the trade gap with Germany and vowing to make the country spend more on defense, as Matt Boyd points out, because what we really need are fewer BMWs manufactured in South Carolina and more of a German military presence in Europe. That's always worked out great before.
Yeah, I think it will restore the 1939 balance, I think.
Yeah, but as Boyd points out, the more the narrative focuses on Trump's toughness and bluster with our allies, the less anybody focuses on what's really been exposed, and that's his weakness. They're walking all over the American president in a way we haven't seen since the days of disco and Space Invaders. None of this seems to permeate the family circle of Trump's White House, where, as ever, mythology crowds out any notion of policy or reality. As Hope Hicks, Trump's one-time corporate flack, put it in a breathtaking statement this week that Trump himself might well have authored, the president has a magnetic personality and exudes positive energy, has an unparalleled ability to communicate with people, treats everybody with respect, and is, of course, brilliant with a great sense of humor. Now, out here in the world that isn't Narnia, we've all got enough of a sample size now to know what kind of leader Trump is. He punches down like all bullies. He prefers to flex his muscle with those who are inherently smaller or where the stakes are impossibly trivial. Like all Twitter trolls, he's got an endless supply of insults to be dished out in 140 characters or less, using all caps and exclamation points as long as he doesn't have to stand in front of you and look at you level. Just how Trump is when the adversary isn't somebody who works for him or serves as a prop in some way, ask Recep Tayyip Erdogan.
Okay.
A few weeks ago, just after Erdogan, I think is the proper pronunciation, visited the White House, a bunch of Turkish goons kicked in the heads of protesters outside the country's embassy. Thanks to this excellent video analysis from the New York Times, we know several of those thugs had ties to Turkey's security service. Erdogan watched the bloody crackdown from behind the armored window of his car, 2 miles from the White House. And what did Trump do about it? Nothing.
Right. It is, all right. I mean, he should have something. That's a tough one, to be sure, just because you're dealing with diplomatic personnel or people who can plausibly claim diplomatic immunity, but still,
right.
You get out there and say,
I'm not saying.
You Turkish sons of,
Yeah, look, I'm not saying that Trump is Hitler, but let's look back at Neville Chamberlain doing nothing and, the consequences of one getting the idea that you can do anything you want and it doesn't matter.
Yes.
Right? Because everybody else is going to look at that and say, Trump isn't Hitler, he's Chamberlain.
Yeah.
Walk all over him.
That's, yeah. It's sad.
So that's part of what happens when you relinquish your leadership. And that's why yesterday when we were talking about that picture of the G7 leaders walking and Angela Merkel, who's the leader of the free world, pushing the little baby buggy with Trump in it. When you give up that sort of stuff and stuff like that happens, it all really, really matters. And it matters in the long run, and I think it'll matter to Trump voters. So the two sides of my discussion today, the first one is about what it means for Trump to make a terrible decision about the Paris Accords. That's assuming he's going to do what he's been telegraphing. And the thing about Trump is that generally what you see is what you get, and that's why I'm expecting him to withdraw. The other side is what kind of electoral consequences do you have with everything that Trump is doing? There's some interesting pieces on that today. Let's start with the Republicans. This one is on Jeff Flake.
Okay.
It's from the Washington Post. The Republicans who criticize Trump face peril. Jeff Flake is about to find out. He's basically opposed Trump on just about everything. And few congressional Republicans, the story says, go as far as Flake, fearful that pro-Trump forces could derail the re-election campaigns next year. Flake is already paying his own price, drawing a conservative primary opponent and probably earning him the distinction as the GOP incumbent most vulnerable to an intra-party challenge. Now, if he wins his primary, it sends a huge message, and if he loses his primary, it also sends a huge message.
Yes.
So I think watching that is going to be quite interesting. He is not John McCain. He is independent. Arizona likes independence, but McCain has much more name recognition than Flake does. And so we'll see what happens.
Yes, that's true. We will. I predict that we will see it.
Meanwhile, Kelly Ward, Flake's conservative opponent, calls his refusal to support Trump last year treacherous and criticized him for standing against the president before Donald Trump became the nominee, after he became the nominee, and after he became the president, which is one of the reasons I like Flake. She also warned that nothing short of a full repeal of Obamacare would be acceptable to many GOP voters.
Blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, this is at a time when the Senate is saying we don't have enough votes to pass this.
We don't know how to do it. We not only do we not have enough votes, I'm not certain we could write the thing correctly. All right. Mm-hmm. Sure. Just keep saying. I mean, that's what's in the box when they send you the campaign in a box.
Right.
Just read the cards.
And that's what happens. Now, do I have that article handy? There was an article in, there it is. Just in passing, because I thought you might find this interesting, so I'm just going to add this to the list.
Why not?
It's called "This Senate Staffer Could Change the Course of the Healthcare Debate." And it looks like it's all about Elizabeth McDonough, the Senate parliamentarian. So I thought if you hadn't seen that article, you might enjoy it, and I'll just toss that in there.
Okay.
But to continue with our idea here about electoral consequences, this next set is actually about Britain.
Britain?
Yeah, because for Britain's populist right, Brexit success comes with a poisoned pill.
So
everybody hates UKIP now.
Yeah. Oh, boy, do they. And they're in the news for at least two things today.
Yes. So this is at Clacton-on-Sea. I love the British town names.
Oh, okay.
If the vote brought vindication, it has not ushered UKIP any closer to political power. In fact, exactly the opposite. What happens to far-right populist movements when their fondest dreams come true? If the experience of UKIP is any guide, the answer is they fall apart.
Oh, all right.
A year after achieving its most sacred ambition, the party long led by President Trump's favorite European politician, Nigel Farage, is in disarray, scarred by prominent defections and vicious feuding, some of it physical. Among its remaining members, an election on June 8th in which the party's share of the vote is expected to crater may be UKIP's death blow. And while that's going on, here's a story in The Guardian. Nigel Farage is a person of interest in FBI investigation into Trump and Russia.
Yeah, I was very surprised to see that. Well, I mean, I was just because I thought, well, I'm amazed that they've expanded their scope that much. On the other hand, I guess it stands to reason. He's been, like you said, Trump's favorite European.
Did you say reason or treason?
Both. I just put the T in parentheses.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
Because sources with knowledge of the investigation said the former UKIP leader had raised the interest of FBI investigators because of his relationships with individuals connected to both the Trump campaign and Julian Assange, the WikiLeaks founder whom Farage visited in March.
Yes.
And they talked about the hacks and how that affected the election. Farage has not been accused of wrongdoing and is not a suspect or a target, just a person of interest. And that means investigators believe he may have information about the acts that are under investigation, and he may therefore be subject to their scrutiny.
All right.
One of the things the intelligence investigators have been looking at is points of contact and persons involved. If you triangulate Russia, WikiLeaks, Assange, and Trump, the person who comes up with the most hits is Nigel Farage. He's right in the middle of those relationships. He turns up over and over again, a lot of attention being paid to him. And also, he has links to Roger Stone.
Well, that won't help.
Right. So while all that is going on, of course, we have Comey expected to testify, James Comey, the ex-FBI chief, expected to testify before the Senate next week.
Okay.
If he isn't blocked.
Blocked.
Well, Trump could say executive privilege, he can't talk about any of our conversations. He could try that.
Yeah.
It would be politically bad.
He could try it. I am curious about the dynamics.
Bad judgment, so he might.
Yeah. I mean, the optics are certainly terrible. I'm curious about the dynamics. I mean, I gather that despite the fact that Comey's not a federal employee and not a executive branch employee anymore, doesn't quite do the trick. I mean, obviously he's privy to knowledge that he gained while he was an executive branch employee, but it might be a little trickier than we think. It may not be the case that he can be barred from testifying.
Right, but it's one of those things that you get to test. Here's how the Times writes it up. Courts have recognized a president's constitutional right to keep his discussions a secret in most instances. A White House spokeswoman had no comment on whether Mr. Trump planned to try to block Mr. Comey's testimony. It's a delicate decision with political and legal consequences. If they claim executive privilege politically, it gives the appearance of something to hide. But American intelligence agencies have concluded Russian hackers and propagandists worked to tip the election in Mr. Trump's favor. In fact, I would add the evidence is pretty overwhelming, even with what we know publicly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So it's an interesting question. Armando points out that, Trump could always release the tapes that he claims or sort of claims or maybe alluded to. Mm-hmm. And that would answer the question. And what if Trump said, I have tapes that say none of this is true, but I'm not releasing them because executive privilege?
That would be interesting.
And besides, there's an 18-minute gap.
Yeah, I'm not so sure that, for instance, I wonder whether if he still hasn't claimed that there are tapes outright, But I wonder
but what Comey's testimony does is brings all this stuff to a head. In other words, this is all speculation, and yet once he starts to testify, then it comes down to, okay, what is he actually going to do? And are there? And does he claim? And will he release? And so on and so forth.
How strong is the claim of of executive privilege if you're also claiming, I mean, if you're using it to block the contents of conversations from coming to light, but if you're also threatening that you've taped them and you may release them, how strong a privilege claim have you got? That's another new one.
Trump has spoiled most of his privilege claims so far by tweeting about stuff.
But I mean, even the Watergate investigators in the end found that the claim of or had it found for them in the courts that the claim of executive privilege was unwarranted, and in that case there were tapes
right at the very end, right before
that the president didn't want to release. I can't imagine that under that you can claim executive privilege in the same situation plus threatening to release the tapes yourself.
But Trump is a bundle of contradictions, so I'm just throwing that out there.
He's a bundle.
I don't remember exactly, but my recollection goes along something like this. There were tapes in the Nixon era, and there were tapes of Nixon talking to Haldeman about getting the CIA to block the FBI, and that was considered a smoking gun tape when it was released, right after which Nixon resigned. That's my memory of it, although people can correct me if that's not exactly what happened.
Okay. The floor is open. Anyone want to correct them? No?
Yeah,
all right.
That's what I remember from the time. That was a while ago.
Okay. Well, that's a first-hand account. It's a couple of years later, but okay.
Yeah, a couple of years later. Anyway, so we have that. And so, again, it's just another example of how the whole Russia investigation ain't going away no matter what.
All right. Well, I didn't expect that it was going to.
Right.
But I liked piling on.
Stuff happened since that time, because there was another impeachment that was Clinton's, and Armando points out in the background that there were decisions that happened at that time. That's why it's nice to talk to actual lawyers. I am not a lawyer. I don't play one on the internet. But there were other decisions about executive privilege since the Nixon era that to a certain extent clarify things, but at the same time, I think that every time that it comes up again with a president who supposedly may not be able to be indicted while he's a sitting president, that's another issue that may or may not get resolved by the end of Trump's interregnum. So we shall see.
Yeah.
Anytime Armando's available to come on the show and talk about the actual legal aspects of it, because I don't know them all. I don't have them at the tip of my fingertips. What I do know is that we're expecting Comey to testify, and that some of the memos, if they have classified information, are going to be owned by the FBI and therefore the executive branch, the place he was working for when he made those memos. And other stuff he may have copies of himself, and if they're not classified, he gets to read them.
Now you've done it. Armando is calling.
Good.
Okay.
So hopefully we can straighten some of this stuff out, because it is pretty interesting in terms of what's going to happen. Armando.
Yeah, I just wanted to add something on the executive privilege
Please.
point. I think one of the things that's most really fascinating about the possibility of that happening is we sort of have reports on what the substance of these conversations were. Particularly, suppose the
secondhand through friends.
Right, but suppose the question is this. Because you can't invoke executive privilege until the question's out. You can't just say, well, Comey can't go testify.
In advance.
Because there's obviously he can, but is there a question that implicates executive privilege?
Right, so he can go and he can testify against the weather, and you have nothing to say about it. You got to know what he's going to say.
So let's talk about what Comey has supposedly, based on leaks, what we believe happened. Take the January 27th dinner. Can you take it easy? Why can you just let him off the hook? Conversation, allegedly, right?
Yeah.
A deliberative process.
I'm sorry, you I
well,
only heard
the
deliberative.
basis of executive privilege in this context is, counsel to the president.
Yeah.
Free, frank discussions, executive deliberative process, right?
Right.
So then, in essence, if Trump does say that question touches on executive privilege. He's admitting that he talked to Comey about the Flynn investigation.
Yes. Okay. I see. Yeah. I mean, and interestingly, of course, and this will be the side discussion, I suppose, is that you were actually trying to end the deliberations.
Exactly.
But Trump is most likely to say, yeah, I call that code red.
Yeah. Well, good.
Okay. So he's going to admit the reports.
Yes.
Because he's Trump. You tell him not to, so he's going to do the exact opposite.
All right, but we'd be deprived, I guess, of the video footage, which is valuable politically. But the essence of what we're expecting Comey to testify is in itself confirmed by the invocation of executive privilege.
Yes, I see what you mean. And if there's any...
Plus,
if it's
it looks bad politically, so you have both of those at the same time.
Yeah, but I'm saying it's a cover-up. It's a crappy cover-up because all it really is confirmation.
Yeah. It hurts the supporters in every way possible.
Right. So the other part of that I would, and then I'll let you guys get back to it, is the alleged conversation deliberative and an executive privilege conversation?
You mean if he just orders them to do something illegal and Comey doesn't say anything, that's not deliberative?
Yeah. He calls them in and says, shut down this investigation. Is that deliberative? It's not, is it? I mean, I think one of the things that's interesting about that, and that's why I pointed you guys to the Clinton era cases, I'd have to look at them more closely.
Yeah.
But one of the cases I remember in particular was Betty Curry. I don't know if you remember Betty. Betty Curry had to testify about what Clinton told her. I gave her a gift. I forget the whole story, but anyway, it was about Monica Lewinsky, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the court said no. Betty Curry had to testify, and she said that. And the court said that about a few things. I just don't think the contours of this discussion are going to fit very nicely. Now, so if he invokes it, Comey can't talk until court tells him he can. I get that. And you're right about the political firestorm that would follow. But just being a lawyer, I'll take it through. Okay, suppose the committee goes then to court or say Mueller does.
Yeah, the committee is not going.
Well, what does the court say? I don't know that if executive privilege can even cover this.
They'll try, though. They may lose.
Well, right. I mean, it would try anyway, but and for a number of reasons. One may just simply be they don't actually understand executive privilege, and the other may be, well, so what? Whether we understand it or not, it's a delay, and that's a good thing.
It'll take 6 months to figure out.
Or maybe one of our judicial appointees will agree that our upside down understanding of executive privilege is right.
I'm just looking at this from the point of view of past this prologue. So I can envision the legal team for Trump, based on their experience with his real estate business, either trying to delay, bluster, threaten, or claim executive privilege. And just when they do, Trump says, no, I did it, and I'm going to do it, because he gives an interview to some conservative, Fox News, and says, I did everything you're saying, and what are you going to do about it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that
thereby completely undermining his legal team. That's what I would expect.
It's interesting you say it that way, because I always think that the variable here is not so much what people believe. I think at this point everyone believes he did do it. I think even his own people, his own supporters.
It's whether or not you take his cover away. Or their cover.
Yeah, but I think its biggest impact is with the media. One of the points I made in a Twitter thing I did the other day was what's really damaging about this Trump-Russia story. It is exactly the kind of scandal our media knows how to handle. This is what they do. They understand it. It's in their box. Oh, he's covering it up. Oh, he's invoking executive privilege. Oh, there's a special prosecutor.
Oh, they can do that a whole lot better than they can do policy, that's for sure.
Exactly. And this is one that...
Chris Cillizza can get this one.
Exactly. So even Cillizza would be, oh my God, he stopped Comey from testifying.
And no, Cillizza would write, look at the tweet that Trump just did. This is how he winds up winning the end of the day. Well,
He
the
could
tweet
have.
was about putting himself in jeopardy, and didn't see that, but that's okay.
Yeah, and I do think the media's approach to this is important.
It
Not
is,
because-
and it's gotten better over time since his election.
And I know listeners say, "Oh, we got to talk about healthcare," and I think you and I ended up sort of agreeing that talk about those things, but understand the reality is it doesn't matter that much how much Democrats talk about Trump Russia. Where it matters is how the media talks about Trump Russia.
Yes, and it doesn't matter how much Democrats talk about health care. What matters is whether the constituents themselves lose their health care. It's like talking about the difference between a depression and a recession.
Yeah.
A depression is when I'm out of work. A recession is when somebody I know is out of work. And if that's the case, and you're out of work, you don't care about Friday jobs numbers. You know whether you have a job or not.
Yes, I guess.
Right.
Oh, there he is. Okay. I thought we might have
I
lost him for
totally
a second.
agree. We're agreeing too much, Greg.
Gotta end the call.
I'll go back.
So you're going to have to get off.
Yeah, I have to get off because I've agreed too much. The quota has been met,
You're going to spoil everything.
and I'll go back to listening.
Okay. Well, thank you.
All right,
Thank you for those insights, though. I mean, again, I am not a lawyer. I don't play one. It just seems to me like this is a fascinating aspect of this that may well come up next week.
Yeah, I think it will.
We should be
Okay.
prepared. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
So let's just in my few minutes remaining, I'm just going to throw out some other things because I think they're all fascinating. Here's a piece again from the Washington Examiner with Mick Mulvaney saying the day of the CBO has probably come and gone.
Yes, I did.
Making the case that there is no reason for independent analysis, not when we can tell you what's happening.
Right. Absolutely.
Amazing.
Perfect.
Gene Sperling on Twitter, stunningly reckless and irresponsible, fine to differ with CBO, terrible to question value of an independent CEO.
Mm-hmm.
That's pretty cool. We have a new Kaiser poll. Who is responsible for healthcare problems? Obama Dems who passed ACA, 26%. Trump GOP now in control, 63%. That's been true for months now.
Mm.
And so whatever happens with the Affordable Care Act and the American Health Care Act, and Obamacare repeal, GOP owns this, and they're going to have to take responsibility.
They're going to have to show that they can govern.
Well, the public isn't going to be all that interested in what the media claims has to happen or not has to happen.
Oh.
But what is going to wind up happening is, they're going to pay a price for whatever they do.
Yes. When can we get to the day where we collect?
June 20th.
June 20th. Okay, that's day one. We'll take a down payment.
Yeah, that's Georgia.
Yes.
All right. So we have that. We have. This is interesting. Trump, Russia. Devin Nunes subpoenaed. This is from the Sydney Morning Herald. Sometimes you have to read the world papers to figure out what's going on in your own country.
Yes. By the way, Sydney Morning Herald, I noticed for the first time their shortened URL.
Smack my head.
Yeah.
SMH. That's
Perfect
why I always
time.
notice it when they're there.
Okay.
Okay.
So what do they have to say? It was,
Anyway, this is a
Nunes.
Jonathan Landay
Or
piece, who's one of our
Nunes.
guys. So,
okay.
But Washington, a political feud, this might be a Reuters piece, I'm not sure. A political feud erupted on Wednesday over the U.S. House Intelligence Committee's probe of suspected Russian meddling, with charges that the panel's Republican chairman subpoenaed the CIA, FBI, and National Security Agency without telling Democrats.
What?
Committee aides complained that the chairman, Representative Devin Nunes, who I thought was supposed to be excluded from this,
Yes.
who publicly recused himself from leading the Russia probe in April following a secret visit he paid to White House officials, failed to consult Democrats on the subpoenas. The subpoenas asked the spy agencies to provide details of any requests made by two top Obama administration aides and the former CIA director to unmask names of Trump campaign advisors. The former officials named were Susan Rice and John Brennan.
Yes.
So basically, we heard that the Intelligence Committee was going to subpoena some interesting stuff in regard to Russia yesterday, like Michael Flynn and Michael Cohen, who says, well, Reuters does, in connection with the Russia probe, and also Flynn Intel LLC and Michael D. Cohen and Associates PC. So they're doing the firms as well as the individuals.
Good.
And that matters because less likely to be able to invoke the fifth if you're doing the firms, because they're not people, despite what Mitt Romney said. And at the same time, is that, we also heard, and they're also going to look at unmasking. And my first reaction is that they're still onto that? What is that all about? That's stupid. But it turns out the committee as a whole wants to talk to Flint and Cohen, but Nunes, the chairman, is the one who did the subpoenas for the unmasking part, still trying to carry the White House's water.
Yes, from recusal.
Right. Now remember, in this particular probe, Conaway is the Republican who took Nunes's place. Mm-hmm. And who seems to be a lot more reasonable.
Did he know?
I don't know. It doesn't say. And so the whole thing is pretty wacky, and that's why I thought I'd bring it to your attention.
Yeah, it did. It grabbed my eye earlier this morning as well. And yeah, I mean, it's a huge problem that this guy is supposed to be recused, and he's
he recuses himself the way Jeff Sessions does.
Yeah, I want to just for all of the members of the Democratic House leadership who are listening to today's program, that raises a huge question of the privileges of the House, and you can get a privileged resolution to the floor and censure the chair or demand that he be removed as chair, or for that matter, I mean, you won't go this far, but honestly, at some point, you say, this guy, he's recused, and he's more than meddling in the affairs of the investigation. He's still directing the investigation. That's a gigantic violation of, well, I don't even know whether House ethics rules have rules dealing with recusal.
But what do you do? Complain to Paul Ryan?
Well, you do. I mean, he'll reject it, but that's fine. But what do you do about Trump? I mean, it's the same thing. You simply have to make the case. And really, honestly, the argument has to be, there's nothing you can do to keep this guy's hands out of the investigation so long as he is a member of Congress. That means this guy needs to be expelled from Congress to keep his hands out of this investigation. They'll never agree to it, but you can certainly bring a privileged resolution, and you'll have to have a vote, and they'll vote to table it. But you should bring a privileged resolution. This implicates the question of the privileges of the House, that there are members of the House who are supposed to be hands off on an investigation of the president and the president's activities. And from a position of recusal, he's exercising all the prerogatives of the chair
while he's being investigated by the ethics committee.
This guy can't stay. He can't. And he can't keep his hands off. And there's nothing we can do to keep him from meddling in this thing he's supposed to be recused from. The only thing that's going to work is some kind of rebuke from the House or his expulsion from the House, so he just doesn't have access to this material. It's not
more to come on that, right? Because, I mean, this is like a major egregious thing, and I would think the Democrats are going to make a lot of noise about it.
I mean, it's something that he might have had the authority to do if he were, as chairman, if he weren't recused. But, I guess all that's supposed to be informal. I don't know. There really needs to be some sort of, they need to make,
there ought to be a law.
Put some meaning to the word recusal. That's crazy.
Look who we talked to about making laws.
Yeah, I wonder if they know anybody.
I don't know, because they don't seem to be able to get anything done there. Now, here's another twist on the Republican problem. We're talking about the optics of how bad it would look if they invoked executive privilege, and the optics of somebody like Nunes who's supposed to be recused not recusing himself. And this is a slightly different story in the Washington Post, but it's got this fantastic picture of Darrell Issa on the roof of a building.
Yes.
This is his office in Vista, California, on May 30th, 2017, and he apparently ran up to the roof of the building to avoid demonstrators and people who were questioning him about what's going on. And the title of the Post is "A Republican Weak Spot in 2018, Longtime Lawmakers in Shifting Districts," Issa being one of them. He barely won re-election last time. This is in San Diego. Outside San Diego, a 14-year-old incumbent climbed atop the roof of his district congressional office to photograph protesters opposed to his support for a Republican health care bill. Just up the highway in Orange County, a 28-year incumbent mused about his belief in a conspiracy about a Democratic National Committee staffer slain in Washington last year. Across the continent, in northern New Jersey, an 8-year incumbent faced a hostile crowd at a town hall, winning loud applause only when he denounced President Trump. These are strange times for some longtime House Republicans. After years, sometimes decades, coasting to re-election in traditional Republican strongholds, these lawmakers find themselves under fire from angry constituents swept up in organized efforts to oppose Trump. And in some cases, they're already seeing Democratic opponents line up against them for an election 17 months away. Collectively, Democrats are much more focused on dozens of seats held by relatively new Republicans who've never run into the headwinds of midterm elections with their own party's president facing deep unpopularity. But Democrats have also turned a powerful spotlight on a collection of veteran GOP lawmakers whose districts have changed underneath them, even while these districts continued all the way to 2016 to re-elect their representatives by wide margins. Representative Dana Rohrabacher, who's Russia's number one agent in Congress.
According to Kevin McCarthy.
Right. And so I'm not saying it. It's not slander. Kevin McCarthy says it. The Representative Leonard Lance, who despite winning all 5 of his congressional races in New Jersey by more than 8 percentage points, is running as one of the most outspoken anti-Trump Republicans on Capitol Hill. That's in large part because his district in the state's wealthy, well-educated suburbs, the ones we were just talking about, swung from favoring Romney to Clinton over Trump last year. And so on and so forth. Fascinating article. And again, I guess to the point I was making on Twitter this morning, I get a little tired of this, nothing matters. Trump will always have his 40% support. First of all, that's not true. Half of his base are core, and they're the party regulars and rally goers, and the other half are conditional. And if he does too much egregious stuff, he will lose them. Strong support for Trump is already going down tremendously, according to Quinnipiac, even within Trump supporters. You have Republicans who, in fact, are vulnerable. You have this Georgia special election on June 20th, which I think will say a lot about which direction we're going. It's not likely, but it's certainly a reasonable thing to think that the House could flip in 2018, not a done deal. The odds probably still favor Republicans holding it, but not by much, and it's eroding every day. So the whole idea that nothing matters doesn't make any sense to me. I think it all matters, and I think it's all cumulative in regard to the hits that Trump takes all the time, whether it's on climate, whether it's, a fancy way of saying it that reporters use all the time. You only have a certain amount of political capital. And whatever Trump did in the first 100 days actually wasn't that much legislatively. He did a bunch of things, like he's doing with climate change and the Paris Accord, that are executive order, and they do matter. It's not like nothing has happened. But legislatively, almost nothing has happened. And he's vulnerable. And the people who are trying to pass crap legislation that the public doesn't like healthcare reform, are vulnerable as well. So the idea that none of this matters, I don't buy it for a minute. I think it all matters.
Well, nothing matters. So,
yeah, well,
So it doesn't matter whether you're right.
Again, going back to the Nixon era, he looked invulnerable, and it wasn't so.
Yeah, well, as we're always reminding ourselves these things do take time. But boy, I mean, what's interesting is how much time it takes even when it's obvious and admitted to.
Yes. It's all out there and it still takes time.
Yeah.
Part of the reason for that is the he said, she said nature of a lot of political reporting, where you're obligated to say, no, Howard Baker defends Nixon because there's no smoking gun, he says, until there's a smoking gun. And so what seems to be obvious and what seems to be obfuscation and twisting stuff gets treated as if it somehow has factual significance because the Republican said it, therefore you have to report it. And that just delays things. Now, you have to do that, I suppose. There isn't always another side, even if the other side is incredibly stupid. But we'll see.
All right.
All right. With that, I'm going to leave you, but thanks so much for having me on. It was a great discussion. And this is Greg Dworkin speaking with my refrigerator-less friend,
yes,
David Waldman, Kagro in the morning. He'll be back tomorrow. I'll be back on Monday, and we'll do it again.
Okay. Very good.
I think stuff will happen.
Probably. Even some of the days that we call weekends will be jammed full of events to analyze. And I guess wonder whether Trump will be back at the golf course. If so,
I don't know, but look for those breaking stories at 5 p.m.
Yeah, and right, Friday, 5 p.m., no longer the end of the news dump cycle either.
Yeah. All right, take care. I'll talk to you. And
Okay.
Thanks to Armando for coming on.
Okay, thank you, and we'll check in with you again next week. Let's see, as a matter of fact, Armando has just sent me the message here. Eric Erickson, and he has reports in quotes here. Erickson reports Priebus leaving White House. So we'll see about that one. I guess I've seen people kind of drop that hint or rumor a couple of times hasn't turned out to be true yet. And so Sebastian Gorka is still there, so I suppose there's no fixing that. But we'll just, I guess, wait and see exactly what that's supposed to mean. Man. Oh, by the way, I was kidding the other day, but we should really do this. I know it's like no longer fashionable for theme parks, or we no longer want theme parks to be keeping killer whales in captivity, but I just wanted to throw this one out on the radio too. We did it on Twitter the other day, but I want all the ears on this. If we're gonna have captive killer whales still, around in these theme parks, I would like to see one named Sebastian Orca. And I think or you could do Sebastian G. Orca if you really want to carry it that much further. But we might as well have some fun with this guy while we still have him around. If we're going to have to be forced to swallow this guy for any longer anyway. So Priebus, I don't know. I mean, maybe. I think that's the conservatives' dream. They're angry with him because he's passes for moderate, I guess, in this White House, which is insane because he's a total nutcase, loony, fringe, conservative wacko. And again, conservative here, is basically now a catch-all for wacko. There's nothing conservative. They're not conserving anything at all. Who would be, that's chief of staff. Who would take his place? I really don't know. And I guess it's up to Eric Erickson to come up with that one. And maybe he thinks it's him. Eric Erickson, of course, let's see, we saw him tweeting about the Paris Climate Accords theme, I guess, the other day, insisting that, how did he put it? Something, he loves to talk about his Christianity because he's such a fantastic Christian. I worship Jesus Christ, not Mother Earth. So that means I don't have to, or whatever it is, whatever, blah, blah, blah. I don't have to care about global warming, I think was what he wanted to get around to, which I guess is true. You don't have to care about anything. You just really what you have to is shut the F up and let us do what we need to do to save the planet. I don't care whether you care about it or not. It's happening. And it's, there are things that need to be done about it. So I don't know. I guess he thought that was really super clever and gave him another opportunity to say something about Jesus so that, I don't know. I guess people were supposed to read that and think he was a devout Christian or something. I'm not sure really why he cares about that, but, so on. If he wants to occupy himself that way, I guess. Let's see. What other things happening? People still talking about Trump's typo from yesterday, and I'm not sure whether we've really gotten to this yet or not on the show, but if we've gotten to the point where people were predicting yesterday, and I have to believe that this is the case, and I keep seeing hints at it, but I can't tell which ones are jokes and which ones are real, or which ones are saying something like this, but they really mean something else. But the prediction was that by today, we would see the president and surrogates out there insisting that he absolutely, positively, no doubt about it, meant to type that ridiculous typo that he sent yesterday, which apparently now has an official pronunciation out. I just saw it fly by on Twitter. Kovfefe. And that's, I guess they include that in an AP piece here, has the pronunciation in it. Anyway, but I'm worried about the possibility that this might actually come to pass, that they will say yes, and everyone knows it's a word and exactly what it means, and I meant to type it, which would be weird because, of course, I thought that the follow-up tweet to it was Trump saying, I made a typo, that's okay. And that's for the first time, I agreed with him there on that and say, okay, people make typos on Twitter. It's all right. I do it. You do it. We all do it. Sometimes we make fun of it. Sometimes not. You'd think maybe as president of the United States, you'd want to take greater care in not making them or vet your statements or whatever, but that's clearly not happening. So it was okay for him to, laugh it up and say, I made a mistake. But then to reverse course in 24 hours and say, no, not only did I not make a mistake, it's a real word, and you're the crazy one if you don't know that. And I think we might be getting to that. I think there are people, they hinted at it yesterday, and I think it was even Reince Priebus. Maybe this is why he's being fired. or being eased out or whatever's happening. He sort of hinted at, and Sean Spicer, I guess, that makes more sense that it would have been him. Now I may be confusing the two of them, saying, Well, the president, there was people who know the president knew exactly what he meant, and I don't think that was necessarily meant to say it's a word, but it's a secret word, and only his supporters know it. So much as, well, everybody knows that he was trying to say the word coverage, and he just had a little slip of the fingers, and it didn't work out, and that's all there is to it. And that would be like the first reasonable thing they've ever said. So I guess there's some chance that they didn't mean that at all. So I don't know. I don't know what to tell you. Okay, moving on. Let's see. We've got a lot to mention today, and I don't know how in-depth we'll be able to go on certain things. Let me start with this one just because it was top of the feed, so to speak. No surprise here, and I guess we shouldn't feel shocked that it would happen, but we can be sorry that it did. This in Politico, Ken Vogel, the title, "We Were Used, Abused, and Exploited. Victims of Immigrant Crime." Remember how Trump was going to be making that a priority, that he was going to vilify undocumented migrants by, well, among other things, he was going to order the collection of any evidence that they had engaged in criminal activity and have weekly reports compiled so that every week he would have something nasty to say about undocumented immigrants. And growing up around that effort, there was this establishment, I guess, of a nonprofit organization, supposedly affiliated with this effort by the Trump administration, which immediately should call into question their nonprofit status because, and not just because it's political in nature, but also because there isn't anything in Trump's orbit that can stay nonprofit. Anyway, it doesn't mean they actually make a profit. It just means that they're in it to siphon money out of other people and put it in their pockets, and so that doesn't. That's not in accord with the governance of a nonprofit organization. But it's not to say that anybody profits, except for the directors who were embezzling the money. Anyway, who was used, abused, and exploited? Victims of immigrant crime, who I guess thought they were going to get a boost from this administration, instead say they were taken advantage of by Trump and a nonprofit group backing him. Let's get the story out here. As he built support for his signature political issue, Donald Trump formed a powerful partnership with a nonprofit group. I love they throw it in there because it's powerful because Donald Trump, but he's powerless in many instances. Although there is an article out now. I do see this. I'm distracted by Sam Stein's latest from the Huffington Post that argues how powerful the president actually is. And it's true in certain senses and untrue in others. And so we'll sort it all out for you. The battle of the headlines. But here in this story about the nonprofit group abusing and exploiting again, for a second time, the victims of crimes committed by undocumented immigrants. As he built support for this political issue, Trump forms a powerful partnership with a nonprofit group dedicated to families of those killed by undocumented immigrants. It's not that many of them, but you don't want one. So, okay, sad thing, right? But now some of those families are alleging they were exploited by both the nonprofit group and, to a lesser extent, it says here, for whatever reason, by President Trump. I would think maybe it was an even greater extent. Except that they enjoyed their time in the spotlight, possibly. More than a dozen families involved in the Houston-based Remembrance Project, including 2 who spoke at the Republican National Convention, and several more who spoke at Trump's rallies or were featured in his campaign ads, have parted ways with the organization, according to people familiar with the situation, including 6 of the families. And by the way, let's see, it looks like there are Trump is in this picture illustrating the article, holding up, I don't know, a plaque of some kind, which is titled "The Stolen Lives Quilt." This would be, I guess, something in remembrance of these Americans who were killed by undocumented immigrants, allegedly. And let's see, for a grand total of, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 12, 15, 18, 21, 24, 27, 30. I probably could have counted the rows and then multiplied it. Instead, 30's not a lot. I mean, by the way, if it was 30 gun accidents in the last X number of years, gun enthusiasts would say, that's like nothing compared to the population of gun owners. Oh my God, that's so negligible. It's totally insignificant statistically. But these 30 people were killed, and they're not insignificant to the families who lost them, but they would be if they were shot by their own guns. Anyway, more than a dozen families involved in the Houston-based Remembrance Project, including 2 who spoke at the Republican National Convention and several more who spoke at Trump's rallies, were featured in the campaign ads, right? They are now breaking with the organization. Several of the families say they feel let down, partly because the charity has done nothing to help them financially, which, I mean, what else would be the reason for forming such a foundation? Well, to exploit the issue and to talk about the issue, and not really to help you, but rather to get people to give money to the director so the director can, I don't know, let's say buy a working refrigerator and or minivan. And that's a great thing. It helps the economy, but it doesn't help anybody who's the victim of these crimes. So let's see, what do we got here? They've done nothing to help them financially, despite suggesting that the money it raised, including $52,000 or more raised with Trump's help, a whopping 52,000, and I assume it's 52,000. It's actually written in the piece here with 1 0 missing. So if you're the Euro type that uses a comma instead of a decimal point, the way we use it in money, $52 is what it ends up looking like. But I'm sure it's 52,000. But Mr. Billionaire can only come up with the $52,000 he helps them raise. I mean, that should have been how much he donated to it, but he didn't. The suggestion was, though, that the money raised would be used to assist victims' families. Well, all it's done is talk about them and make plaques with their faces on it, but okay, I'm sure that's helping them. A handful of the families are planning a new group through which they intend to provide such assistance. We'll see about that. Several others have demanded that the Remembrance Project refrain from using their names and likenesses, as well as those of their deceased loved ones, in its marketing materials, and some discussed legal action to force the group to comply. Good luck. We were used, abused, and exploited, and what's worse is that my son was used, abused, and exploited, and is still being used, abused, and exploited, said Brenda Sparks, a former Remembrance Project participant whose son Eric Zepeda died in September 2011 at age 22 after being struck while riding his motorcycle by a car driven by an undocumented immigrant. By the way, I mean, I don't think we should minimize the guy's death, certainly. I mean, he was a person and he died and his mom's sad. But quite honestly, when you're riding a motorcycle in traffic, I mean, okay. So it was his motorcycle was struck by a car driven by an undocumented immigrant. Had he been struck by a car by an American, that's just, hey, I guess if the car is at fault, fine. But motorcycles in traffic, you really, I don't know. I mean, you're asking for it. And you don't run them over on purpose, but I mean, it's a serious, serious risk. But whatever. This one happened to be driven by an undocumented immigrant. And I don't know what to tell you other than that now they want to blame that, as opposed to you have the freedom to do it, but quite honestly, don't choose to drive a motorcycle in traffic. You'll be a lot better off. Trump used the Remembrance Project to get us, and the Remembrance Project also used him, said Sparks, who was among the so-called angel moms who Trump brought on stage at rallies and speeches to tell their stories, including at the August 2016 speech at which he laid out his hardline on immigration plan. So very much like the USA Freedom Kids, he brings you up on stage, them with the promise of payment through a direct contract with them, and angel moms with the promise of an indirect source of aid through the Remembrance Project. And guess what? Nobody got paid. Just putting it out there. Trump himself was the key attraction at a Houston fundraiser for the Remembrance Project less than 2 months before Election Day. Taking time away from his high-octane campaign rallies, the then Republican nominee spoke at a luncheon in Houston featuring about 40 people who had lost loved ones to crimes by undocumented immigrants. Only 30 of them made the plaque, though. The Remembrance Project sold tickets to the event for as much as $10,000 per table, claiming in promotional materials, some featuring video of Trump at a rally calling the group incredible, that proceeds would, quote, sponsor a stolen life, unquote, and thanking donors for, quote, support and contributions made that assists and hashtag angel family, unquote. Nothing has moved me more deeply than the time I've spent with the families of the Remembrance Project, Trump said when he took the stage that afternoon. Families affiliated with the Remembrance Project say they have not received any direct help from the group despite several requests, and the group's leader says that was never the intention. Ho-ho! How do you like that? In interviews, Sparks and several other family members also expressed frustration that Trump has reversed himself on a pledge to repeal an executive order signed by former President Barack Obama deferring deportation proceedings for immigrants who entered the country illegally as children. But Sparks and several other victims' family members who have spent time privately with Trump say they are holding out hope that he'll revert back to his previous position. And they also say they believe that his attraction to their cause, which became an animating theme of his campaign and later his presidency, well, no, it didn't, was less about politics and more about genuine concern for them and the country writ large, even though they don't know what writ large means. By the way, speaking of flip-flops, etc., breaking news coming in. I just saw it tweeted around. Let's see, where's the source on this one? Is it actually Fox Business? Let's see. Well, CNN is reporting it too. Trump expected to keep the U.S. Embassy in Tel Aviv. How do you like that? Or at least for now. That was another of the big campaign promises. I'm going to move the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem and recognize it as the capital of Israel. And then he even goes to Israel and then, et cetera, releases the information that winds up getting one of their spies outed. And P.S., I'm also not doing that thing. So another flip-flop there, just for the record. We'll open that up and click on it so I can put it in today's news roundup with Scott out here. Oh, goodness. CNN, I should guess. Okay, let's stop the auto-playing video. All right. Back to the news, or back to what we were reading about the Remembrance Foundation. They are, that is the families, less convinced about the motivations of the woman who co-founded the Remembrance Project, Maria Espinoza. That's surprising. But okay. The family members of 6 victims and 3 allies who've turned away from the group describe Espinoza as an overpromiser, no way, who used them to get close to Trump. What? And to boost her own profile and influence. You're kidding me. Of course, that matches the profile for just about everybody involved with Donald Trump, but not just everybody. Not only, it's a tried and true formula. I guess I shouldn't say that everybody does it. Some people rely on other methods to get there, but it's familiar. And I'll say it reminds me very much of Katrina Pearson and the way she did things in general with her Tea Party group. She was, a nobody, had nothing going on in her life and was in serious trouble and had been arrested for shoplifting, etc., unable to make ends meet, struggling, etc. That's fine, except for the shoplifting part. But then struck gold by learning that, I can start a non-profit Tea Party group. Since, Tea Party, that trademark doesn't belong to anybody. I can just start a group, and everyone loves giving money all the Tea Party supporters love giving away money to Tea Party groups. And even if we only get a couple of bucks from people, I can pay myself a salary out of that and then run around the country giving speeches at Tea Party rallies and say, yeah, that's what I'm using the money for. You know what? Well, what can I tell you? It galls me that she's able to do that, and she paid herself quite handsomely, by the way. And then, of course, parlayed it into jobs with various Republican candidates until they all fell and dropped like flies, and then she latched onto Trump and then was the most ridiculous liar on his behalf that you've ever seen. Well, maybe I should hire her to raise money for the show. What can I tell you? We just want to get paid here, right? We have no morals. All right. So Maria Espinoza appears to have learned a lot from Katrina Pearson on this. As Trump became more popular, she started wanting more of a public presence, just like her, said Maureen Maloney, a Massachusetts woman whose son Matthew, Denise, D-E-N-I-C-E, was killed in a 2011 accident. Another one. Holy mackerel. And what do you know? He was killed in an accident when his motorcycle was struck by a car driven by a native of Ecuador who was drunk at the time. And that's all That's all terrible and everything. But, okay. So far we've had 2 stories of people, quote unquote, killed by illegal immigrants. And it's not, the story or the overarching narrative is supposed to be that they're coming here and raping and murdering everybody. But I mean, getting in a car accident with a car, even when you're drunk. I mean, it's obviously, don't drive drunk, ladies and gentlemen. Yes, that's true. Huge problem. But a car on motorcycle accident, that's not murder. That's terrible. Some of it's avoidable. It might even be avoidable. The whole premise of the thing is, well, it was avoidable if these people weren't even in the country. Although, honestly, we got plenty of drunk Americans killing people on motorcycles. Got plenty of sober Americans killing Americans on motorcycles. Anyway, dead is dead. I'm sure they're sad. That's true. And it's doubly sad that they're also being screwed by somebody who said they were going to help them. And they didn't. And you'd think they'd be mad at those people. And apparently the one that isn't Trump, they're mad at. And the one that is Trump, they love him. Maloney connected with the Trump campaign through the Remembrance Project and joined Trump on stage during his August immigration policy speech to share the story of her son. She subsequently parted ways with Espinoza, explaining to Politico, the more involved I got, once I got past my son's trial, well, the trial about your son's death, I guess, and could focus more on the organization, it just seemed like my values and my goals were different from what Maria's were. I started to feel like this might be a stepping stone for her. And I'm sure it was. Espinoza says she's eyeing a 2018 run for the Houston congressional seat, after losing a 2016 Republican primary for that seat, despite receiving boosterish, that's what it says, coverage from the pro-Trump Breitbart News and Steve Bannon, who was then serving as the site's executive chairman. Oh, we got some news on them, too. In a December 2015 segment on Breitbart News' radio show, Bannon, who is now Trump's chief strategist in the White House, expressed support for Espinoza's campaign, asserting, "We're going to have your back," while also praising the Remembrance Project as an amazing organization. Everyone loves to use the word amazing. By the way, Bannon did go on from that Breitbart News radio show to becoming the chief strategist in the White House. I am, of course, the host of Daily Kos Radio's news show, and I expect to be invited to be the chief strategist for the next Democratic president. So let's get on that, everybody, and make sure it happens. I just don't really want to begin work before 9, and I'd like to be able to do it from home. Can we work this out? I'm giving you a lot of advance notice. Whoever the next president may be, call me on Skype, please, and we'll talk about it. Anyway, back to this article. The role of the Remembrance Project in Trump's campaign highlights the increasing political involvement of nonprofit groups. This is a problem, by the way, and we've known it for a long time. It's been a problem for a long time, and it's getting worse. Despite weakly enforced regulations intended to limit their political activity, of course, by the way, everyone will remember that Republicans still, to this day, insist that they're going to impeach the IRS commissioner for policing this activity. But I don't know whether they really meant to impeach the IRS. Is it a commissioner or a director? I can't remember now. But they wanted to impeach the head of the IRS for doing this. Don't know whether they really were intent on actually doing that, and I think not. And I think they always knew they didn't have the votes to do it, and every time they tried, they've been defeated in it. But I think the real aim of it here was to intimidate the IRS out of policing exactly this kind of activity so that these people and others like them could get involved in that kind of activity and rob the public, rob taxpayers, rob crime victims, amazingly enough, and enrich themselves. And once they were richer, then they would have a better chance of being included in the Trump government, because that's how Trump picks his minions. If you start as nobody, if you've got a lot of money, we can start talking to one another. All right. So, let's see. For instance, the article continues about weakly enforced regulations. For instance, the Remembrance Project indicated in its request for tax exemption to the Internal Revenue Service that it would, quote, refrain from supporting or opposing political candidates and campaigns in any way, nor would it attempt to influence legislation. But of course, that's all there is to the organization. That's the only thing they do. They don't help any of the victims of these crimes. That much we've learned. So what are you using the money for? Well, I'm flying around the country going to Trump rallies. Yeah, that's pretty much a direct violation of exactly what you said you wouldn't do. And you said you wouldn't do it not out of the goodness of your own heart, but because that's what's required of a nonprofit organization under the tax code. So the scrutiny of the group comes as Trump is further easing enforcement of rules barring political activity by religious nonprofits registered under the same section of the tax code, 501c3, as the Remembrance Project. There's nothing religious about the Remembrance Project, but there's also no legal reason to view them differently at the moment. So in all likelihood, you'll see the regulations loosened on them too. It also sheds light on how Trump was able to quickly build support around his animating political issue by breaking the tax code, is the answer. The White House press office did not respond to a request for comment. They never will, I'm sure. Espinoza, 54, says the Remembrance Project has complied with all applicable provisions of the tax code. They haven't. And rejects any suggestion that she's using the group or her connections to Trump to further her own political career, though she's not doing anything but that. My motives are to be able to save other lives from being stolen because of illegal immigration. That's our mission, she said, attributing complaints to, quote, some sour grapes from people who left her group to start their own ventures. Well, that should be allowed, right? It's entrepreneurialism. What are you so angry about? Espinoza, who points out that her father immigrated to the United States legally, hooray, hasn't lost a family member to crime by immigrants in the country illegally. Rather, she said she decided to start the Remembrance Project in 2009 with her husband, Tim Ling, after becoming disturbed, and she is disturbed, by the killings of several Houston police officers by undocumented immigrants. She and Ling, which is, by the way, spelled L-Y-N-G, there is no I in Ling, but if there was, the name would be lying, just pointing that out, a civil engineer, that is Ling, in late 2010 filed paperwork in Texas to incorporate the Remembrance Project. It was the second charity they'd formed in Texas. The first, the Joint Association to Stop Spina Bifida Corporation, appears to have been mothballed after minimal activity. The Remembrance Project's purpose, according to the Texas filing, would be, quote, to help those persons who have lost loved ones from illegal activities of other, sick, because it's not others, of other, create a remembrance to honor the life lost and to help in the healing process. Wow. Well, that's pretty nebulous, but it's also poorly written. So just to lump that on top of things. The group didn't attract much attention at first, as Espinoza initially devoted her energies to traveling the country with what she called the Stolen Lives Quilt, a banner featuring the names and photographs of victims of crime perpetrated by people in the country illegally. But around 2013, the National Republicans began awaking to the rhetorical impact of having the victims' families lobby against proposed reforms to federal immigration laws that would have provided a pathway to citizenship for many of the 11 million immigrants in the country illegally. Espinoza and the Remembrance Project families found themselves in high demand at Capitol Hill hearings and press conferences, on television, and in congressional town halls. In June 2013, Espinoza and her quilt were featured in a Capitol Hill press conference organized by the Tea Party Patriots. That might even have been, what's-her-name's thing, Katrina. With GOP lawmakers, including then Senator Jeff Sessions, to oppose a so-called amnesty bill. Around that time, the Tea Party Patriots' tax filings show the group donated $7,500 to the Remembrance Project, which appears to be the first grant it received from a well-known conservative nonprofit group. The Remembrance Project also started attracting notice on the anti-immigrant right. It garnered a flattering cover story in the fall 2013 issue of The Social Contract, a journal of the nativist foundation U.S. Incorporated. That group donated, what a dumb name. All right, well, anyway, that group donated a combined $57,500 in 2014 and 2015 to the Remembrance Project, according to U.S. Incorporated's tax filings. The group in 2016 made a modest grant to the Remembrance Project to support the Houston conference at which Trump spoke, according to U.S. Inc.'s President K.C. McAlpin, who personally donated $1,000 to Espinoza's 2016 congressional committee, making him one of the biggest donors to the cash-strapped campaign. All right, so let me just see if I follow that entirely. So U.S. Incorporated made a grant to the Remembrance Project to support the Houston conference at which Trump spoke. So that's sort of, that's marginally questionable as political activity, but okay. U.S. Incorporated is run partly by John Tanton, whom the Anti-Defamation League describes as the primary architect of the modern-day anti-immigrant movement. He once wrote that, quote, for European American society and culture to persist requires a European American majority, and a clear one at that. Espinoza, asked about Tanton's quote, said, I don't know what he meant by that, and asserted she is not anti-immigrant, but rather opposed to illegal immigration. Nonetheless, Trump thrust anti-immigrant rhetoric into the spotlight from the moment he announced his presidential campaign with a June 2015 speech in which he charged that Mexican immigrants are, quote, bringing drugs, they're bringing crime, they're rapists, adding that some, I assume, are good people. The response to the harsh anti-immigrant rhetoric was condemnation from much of the political class on both sides of the aisle. Of course, didn't do anything, but okay. But it was music to the ears of Espinoza and the Remembrance Project families. 3 weeks after his announcement speech, Trump met privately with Espinoza, Sparks, and several of the families at a Los Angeles hotel. Then Trump and the families participated in a press conference at which the families shared the stories of their tragedies and praised Trump, all while holding the Stolen Lives quilt for the cameras and wearing Remembrance Project t-shirts emblazoned with the image of their deceased loved ones. The scene, arranged largely by Espinoza, and it was horrific, repeated itself at Trump rallies and speeches across the country over the next 16 months, as Espinoza built ties to the Trump campaign staff, while the candidate himself came to know many of the families personally. I felt in my heart that Mr. Trump was sincere, said Angie Morfin Vargas, who appeared at Trump rallies to highlight the story of her 13-year-old son Ruben, who was fatally shot by an undocumented immigrant in 1990. When Trump saw her holding her son's quilt at a rally, he asked her, is that your boy? Morfin Vargas recalled. I said yes, and he said he was sorry, but don't worry, everything was going to be okay. He grabbed my son's quilt, and he gave it a kiss, and he signed it. To me, seeing my baby and Mr. Trump on stage, I was just so touched, and it made me feel like my baby didn't die in vain. Well, not too much you can do about those kind of weird feelings, I guess. But several family members said they chafed under Espinoza's demands that they wear their Remembrance Project shirts and praise the group in every appearance. By the time she attended the Houston conference, Morfin Vargas said, I sort of felt like we were just a dog and pony show on stage for all the people in the audience who were donors and who weren't victims. Internal Remembrance Project records reviewed by Politico show that the group sold at least $52,000 worth of tickets at that Houston fundraiser. That haul, even without any contribution from nonprofits like U.S. Incorporated, likely will require the group to file a comprehensive tax return for 2016 that will be publicly available and could offer a fuller view into the group's finances than had been previously available. In past years, the group had informed the IRS that it raised less than $50,000, allowing it to file records that aren't subject to public disclosure. Several victims' families and Remembrance Project donors said that Espinoza left the unmistakable impression that the money raised by the group in Houston and generally would be spent, at least in part, to help the families with legal assistance, counseling, and medical treatment and other costs associated with their tragedies. Interesting picture here of Maria Espinoza. She, quite frankly, looks a little bit like Melania Trump, which I think is weird, but, just what it is. Maria would always find the right words to keep me hanging on with the hope for some help that never came, said one family member. They're really good at that. Aren't they fantastic at that job? This person said she asked Espinoza for assistance through the Remembrance Project. The family member, who did not want to be identified, added that Espinoza ultimately recommended that Remembrance Project participants create a GoFundMe page to help another family dealing with medical costs associated with a crime perpetrated by an undocumented immigrant. So this organization exists to bring in money so that they can then say, if you want money, start a GoFundMe page. Well, she's remarkably well paid and well dressed here, so I guess it's working for her. Texas Republican activist Kathleen Lieberman, who attended the luncheon with 10 associates who each paid $125 for tickets, said, we believed that the money after the dinner was going to help the families, and I was very disappointed to find out that it didn't. McAlpin of U.S. Incorporated said his group supports the Remembrance Project because it brings together the victims' families and commemorates their loved ones in a variety of ways to let the families know they have not been forgotten, which is a nice thing. It's just not help. Not because it promises direct financial support. That's his view of it. But he added there could be circumstances such as not having the money to pay for a decent funeral where the answer would be yes. Those decisions would be up to Maria and Tim. Espinoza told Politico that her group paid for the family's travel to the Houston conference, including airfare, lodging, and several meals, with money fronted by her husband, whom she said has yet to, be paid back. But she insisted she never told the donors or family members that the Remembrance Project would help defray the costs of medical, legal, or counseling bills for their families. We do not do that, she said. She did, however, suggest that the group is considering broadening its mission to provide direct support as it raises more money. We're going to roll out a couple new initiatives and collaborations, bad word, that are so needed. Who says that? Sarah Palin. That are so needed in this great country of ours. And I think it would help the families directly because we certainly don't have the funding to do that. I wish we did. Since Trump's upset victory over Democrat Hillary Clinton, Espinoza has moved quickly to solidify her connections to the new administration and to use them to try to advance the cause. In the weeks after Election Day, the group's representatives met 6 times with top-level administration officials in the Departments of Homeland Security and Justice to talk about a plan for a new program within the Department of Homeland Security to assist the families and victims of crimes perpetrated by undocumented immigrants, according to USA Today op-ed her husband Ling wrote. So, pretty good follow-up on that one. Espinoza didn't respond to a question about whether those meetings, which included one with then Attorney General nominee Sessions, constituted lobbying of the sort that Remembrance Project told the IRS it would refrain from doing. Instead, she responded in an email, "Obviously, your goal is to stifle the voices of families whose loved ones were killed by illegal aliens and to attempt to stop the only organization that shines a bright light on these tragedies." I'm sure that's the reason. 5 days after inauguration, Espinoza and 2 angel moms stood proudly with Vice President Mike Pence and DHS Secretary John Kelly behind Trump at Homeland Security's Washington headquarters as the newly sworn-in president signed a pair of executive orders related to undocumented immigration. One of the orders directed the agency to create the new Victims Program, which would become known as the Victims of Immigration Crime Engagement. That's the VOICE office. In a speech to DHS employees immediately following, Trump singled out several of the families telling their stories and adding, "I want to thank the Remembrance Project, such incredible people, for giving these families a voice. First, these families lost their loved ones, and then they endured a system that ignored them, while at the same time constantly rewarding those who broke the law. For those families, it's been one injustice after another." Forget the accent. But all that turns around beginning today. The Remembrance Project, of course, did a bit of a victory lap on that one. Ling boasted on Facebook that Espinoza conceived of voice and hatched this groundbreaking concept by writing open letters to governors and presidential candidates, including Trump, and asking them to assess taxes on the money immigrants send back home and to use that money to reimburse victims and their families for burial costs, medical and legal expenses, child care, unemployment assistance, and other services. The Voice office does not include plans to make available any direct assistance, by the way, and Ling took it even further, asserting that the involvement of the Remembrance Project and its families helped turn the tide of both the primary and general elections for President Donald J. Trump. So the claiming rights to victory here on that one. Interesting, too, by the way, that these great libertarians and small government conservatives who started this charity and told people, well, the money we raise from your donations today will be used to help the victims' families. And then they decided, I'd rather keep that money. But you know who would be great at helping victims' family is the government. If we could get the government to take over this job by taxing people and then giving that money out to the families of victims, that would be great and totally consistent with our small government agenda. Of course it would not be. It would be the exact opposite. In March, Espinoza announced that the Remembrance Project would be opening a Washington headquarters to support Donald Trump's Voice program, which, of course, would be pretty much illegal under the tax code, but okay. This according to Breitbart News, unveiling the plan. Espinoza told the website that her group has the enthusiastic backing of the Trump administration. Then in April, Ling filed paperwork in Texas to form a more politically oriented arm of the group, which people do. He referred to the Remembrance Project Advocacy Incorporated as a social welfare nonprofit, suggesting it's registered under a section of the tax code, 501c4, that would allow it to directly support or oppose candidates and lobby for legislation. That's probably a too liberal interpretation of what's actually in the law, but it's probably what you'll get away with. We want to be able to support good candidates, Espinoza explained, probably like herself. There are so many families that need help, we just can't keep up with it. And it looks like these politicians are blocking any funding going to the families that need it most. So that's really amazing. That's the end of the article, thank God. I'm sick of this already, but each paragraph reveals just like new depths of depravity with these guys. Imagine this forming this charity and then not doing the job and then trying to see if you can get the government to take over the job, and then they wouldn't do it, and so you form a more political committee with the idea being there are so many victims of these crimes that we just can't keep up with. We can't help all of them even if we wanted to, because there are like 40. Maybe. There's only 30 on our quilt, but there's probably 40, as we learned earlier in the article. Oh, who can keep track of 40 families, really? Can we really afford to help 40 families? No, of course not. What we can afford to do is start donating money to get rid of these politicians that refused, for stupid political reasons, to take over the job that we asked them to take over for us. That is, to tax people and then spend the money on these victims' families, which is what we were supposed to do, but we decided we couldn't afford it. But surely the federal government in its deep pockets could do it. And if their pockets weren't deep enough, they should impose a tax on people and then use that money. Super conservative, isn't it? It's just, that's so upside down, I can't even tell you. And then, of course, the idea of, what we really need to do is get rid of these dumb politicians who won't, do this stupid thing, which they all campaigned against doing. And, also one of the campaigns that it should maybe fund would be Mine for Congress. Gee whiz. What a surprise. Anyway, that story, let's see, a couple of things came up that in the story that reminded me I need to switch gears and cover other stories that came up. One was just sort of the equally confusing, conflicting headline from Sam Stein over at HuffPost. While you this, and I guess first I was drawn in by the headline as like, what are you talking about? I hate when you guys say stuff like this, but maybe it's just clickbait. While you stupid idiot, while you obsessed over Trump's scandals, he's fundamentally changed the country. Yes, another article lecturing you that you've been distracted from the real issue. And it's just so surprising that it comes from, well, it is surprising, actually. It comes from Sam Stein, who, I mean, has he not been as wrapped up in Trump's scandals as any of the rest of us? The headlines, I should discount. I should never read the headlines out loud, because it's 50% of the time it's misleading, stupid, wrong, and the rest of the body of the article has nothing to do with it. But this one was kind of galling. We're all obsessed with all of these things. And yeah, I mean, he's fundamentally changed the country. I don't think anybody believes that he hasn't. The president, the subheader says, has immense power, and despite the Russia saga, he's using it. What's he talking about? On the morning of May 12th, Attorney General Jeff Sessions revealed that he had instructed federal prosecutors to begin pursuing lengthier prison sentences for drug offenders. I think we know all this. Actually, it's been brought up. We haven't discussed it much on this show. I know that the after show has brought it up, and I know you're all up to date on it as an issue. And this is just one of many examples. The basic thrust of this article is he's able to use executive orders and other things, even if he hasn't had very many or any legislative victories. He's got ways to have a tremendous impact on the federal government. No surprise, he's the president of the United States, like it or not. Well, allegedly he's the president of the United States. We're certainly making out as though he were. I mean, duh. I don't know. I brought that up just because, the president has some power. We understand that. We shouldn't lose sight of it. But the idea that we were losing sight of it because of scandals, I don't really know. And plus, it's all related. I mean, he's only the president because of some of those scandals. There is that. That's another issue. Let's see. There was also the flip-flop on Tel Aviv. I definitely wanted to bring that one up. What was it that, I'll have to let me see. Can I scroll back? And, I'm trying to think. Was it the voice thing? Oh, yeah. Let's see. Was it, I wish I had made notes. Say, producer, would I be able to nod at them and say, I want you to make notes about this thing. Oh, was it the GoFundMe pages? No. The $50,000? No. The quilt? Might that have been it? No, I can't remember. Well, I should have made a note along the way. And my desk is in disarray here a little bit because of our move from the kitchen when they were not repairing the refrigerator upstairs. Okay, what was it? Tea party filings? Man, I wish I could remember. All right, well, maybe it'll occur to me a little bit later on down the road. I should move on to some of the other stories that I put aside for the day. Yes. Now I remember. It was Steve Bannon and the interview of Espinoza on the radio show and saying what a fantastic group it was. Let's see. Where shall we go with this one? This is easy enough to access. The report in the Daily Beast. Oh, no, we got an error on this one. Why? Can I read it in? All right, we'll take a look at this here. President Donald Trump, he's president, has exempted his entire senior staff from provisions of his own ethics rules to allow them to work with the political and advocacy groups that support the administration. This is sort of a related story here. Staffers given a, we'll start by saying this. This came up a couple of days ago, and there's been other reporting on it. This just happens to be the most easily accessible story on it, even though I get an error trying to go to the original version of it. But one of the big things that Trump, announced to great fanfare, I'm not going to hire any lobbyists, and there's not going to be any lobbyists in my administration, and in fact, I'm going to have ethics rules. You can't work on issues in my administration that you lobbied on within the last 2 years. And then we learned that, as with everything, and Obama's administration similarly imposed some restrictions and then occasionally issued waivers to people, for whatever reason. They thought it was either not quite directly applicable, or this is so important we just absolutely have to have this subject area expert, whatever the excuse was. There were waivers granted and there are waivers granted on things like this for every administration that adopts similar rules. That's true. Trump, one of the big differences was that not only was he issuing these waivers and issuing them quickly, I mean, we're still in the first 120-something days here, but he was issuing them in tremendous numbers. And, of course, in addition to saying, I was going to keep lobbyists out of the administration, there was the whole sloganeering over drain the swamp, et cetera, et cetera. So if you're campaigning on drain the swamp, this revolving door between lobbying and federal government has to go. And then you adopt these ethics rules on top of it, and then you're already doing waivers left and right. That's an issue. The fact that there are actually so many of them is even more troubling. Worse still, there was a period of the last week or so during which the White House insisted, no, we will not release the names of the people who got waivers, nor will we release the contents of those waivers. So, drain the swamp, I'm not going to have lobbyists, and then I will have lobbyists. In fact, I'll have hundreds of lobbyists, and in fact, I'll waive those restrictions against those lobbyists because I already have them in my administration. I want them there. And on top of that, I'm not going to tell you who they are or why I'm issuing the waiver. But I guess they've bent on the disclosure part, at least in some respects. And I guess they put out sort of a massive compilation of some of these waivers which have been issued. And they've crafted some of these waivers very carefully. And I'm sure the main theme of this one probably is the Steve Bannon waiver. But here the headline tells us Trump exempts entire senior staff from White House ethics rules. And I don't know whether it's just the lobbying ones. It might be broader than that. We'll have to take a look in the rest of this article. Well, basically, he's just, drain the swamp except for anybody who works for me. Duh. That was the whole point of drain the swamp. And Bannon in particular got a pretty broad waiver, but the waiver, in his case, as I understand it, was crafted in such a way that it never says Steve Bannon and Breitbart News, but it's all about Steve Bannon and Breitbart News. They just don't name them. So we never issued a waiver for Steve Bannon. What are you talking about? Well, let's continue on with this read here. Staffers given a pass on those rules include White House Counselor Kellyanne Conway, who has the green light to communicate and meet with political advocacy, trade, and non-profit organizations that formerly employed her consulting firm, despite ethics rules that would otherwise bar work with former clients. Chief White House strategist Steve Bannon also received a waiver to the rules as part of a blanket exemption for all White House appointees, allowing them to communicate with the press. His reported discussions with former colleagues at the pro-Trump site Breitbart News, which Bannon chaired until last year, has raised red flags among ethics watchdogs. Bannon and Conway will both be free to work with a network of political groups backed by the wealthy Mercer family, because that's how they got here, which was integral to Trump's victory last year and continues to support his agenda as president, right? So the successful formula that got him to where he is was Bannon and Conway get to tap the Mercer family network for money to build the organizations and efforts that they needed to get Trump into the White House. And my new ethics rules would cut that off. And I need to stay in the White House. So let's undo the ethics rules. That's all. We'll just waive them. The White House on Wednesday released a list of waivers to the ethics pledge imposed by a January executive order on all administration nominees and appointees. It agreed to do so only after a pointed exchange with federal ethics officials over the scope of their oversight authority. 3 former lobbyists in the White House and 1 on the vice president's staff have also been exempted from revolving door rules imposed by that executive order, allowing them to work on administration policies that might benefit former clients. That was the reason they were brought in, but whatever. The list provides the first official glimpse at the extent to which Trump has circumvented his own ethics rules by hiring former special interest advocates of the type he railed against on the campaign trail. But it does not cover the entire Trump administration and only discloses waivers granted to officials in the executive office of the president and the office of the vice president. The Office of Government Ethics has requested all waivers issued to appointees administration-wide, but it was not immediately clear whether those were to be made available by the White House or the applicable federal agencies. The White House did not immediately respond to questions about further waiver disclosures. The West Wing's 3 former lobbyists have been given wide latitude to work on a range of policy issues that might dovetail, maybe, just sort of, with the interests of their former clients. Energy policy advisor Michael Catanzaro, a former energy industry lobbyist with clients in the oil, gas, and coal sectors, may participate in broad policy matters, in particular matters of general applicability relating to clean power plans and other Obama administration environmental rules. Particular matters of general applicability generally refer to laws or regulations that affect a narrow and identifiable group, say a single industry. In effect, Catanzaro will be free to promote policies that benefit his former clients as long as he doesn't go to bat for them directly. So too will Shahira Knight, a White House economist and former lobbyist for financial services giant Fidelity, who can now participate in broad policy matters, in particular matters of general applicability relating to tax, retirement, and financial services issues. Andrew Olmem, another White House economist and former lobbyist for a host of large financial services and insurance firms, will be free to work with former clients on specific issues affecting bank capital requirements, financial regulation of insurers, and the Puerto Rican debt crisis, all issues on which he has recently lobbied. Those officials have been given freer rein to advance their former clients' financial interests, but ethics rules have also been waived for every other, quote, commissioned officer, staffers who reported directly to the president, in the White House who has worked for a political group in the past 2 years. They figured they had to issue this waiver because he brought his entire campaign staff on, and that would otherwise be prohibited. But I guess that speaks to the idiocy of, the issue as a campaign, as a bit of campaign rhetoric, and also the idiocy of the people who crafted his initial executive orders. I guess they didn't even realize that they were banning their own work. because they don't think of themselves this way. Conway herself, let's see, consulted for more than 50 political policy and advocacy organizations last year, according to the White House financial disclosure statements. She and Bannon will be free to continue working with two campaign vendors in particular, you'll never guess who, Glittering Steel and Cambridge Analytica, that are key components of the Mercer's pro-Trump political endeavors. Bannon helped lead both companies, by the way, and Cambridge Analytica enlisted Conway's consulting services last year. The White House also issued a collective waiver to 6 White House officials formerly employed by the law firm Jones Day, which has sent more than a dozen attorneys to the Trump administration, allowing them to meet and communicate with former colleagues representing the White House, Trump, his campaign, or political entities supporting the president. The White House waiver disclosures came after a tense back and forth with the Office of Government Ethics. The White House initially disputed that OGE had the authority to demand the full list of waivers. After OGE Director Walter Schaub disputed those highly unusual claims, the White House agreed to disclose all ethics pledge waivers. Disclosure was more regimented under a similar executive order imposed by President Barack Obama in 2009. The measure directed OGE to regularly update its website with a list of waivers to a similar ethics pledge. Obama granted 49 in total over 8 years and across his entire administration, along with detailed explanations of why those waivers were in the public interest. No such explanations accompanied the Trump White House's list. Ethics watchdogs appeared nonplussed by the release on Wednesday evening. We now know who was given a waiver from their White House ethics pledge, wrote the left-leaning group Citizens for Responsibility in Washington on Twitter. Looks like the end of the drain in the swamp illusion, and I guess so. All right, so that's the latest on where Bannon is these days and what he's up to. Let's see. What else might we toss in there? It was Eric Lipton tweeting about this story that brought it to my attention, the particular point of the Bannon waiver being crafted such that Bannon's name is not mentioned anywhere in his waiver. Just certain White House personnel who might need to talk to, outside publications and news organizations like, Bannon and Breitbart News. So, by the way, Breitbart News, I think they were eventually denied their credentials. And I guess perhaps with that having happened, maybe they have just abandoned hope of getting them and just said, well, we'll just get our news directly from inside the White House. All we need is for Bannon to have the ethics waiver issued so that we can speak to him without any difficulty. All right. Let's see. What other things can we toss in here? And we'll have to make note of this one. I know that this was shared with me yesterday, and I turned around and just tweeted it out when I saw it, when Kate Sherrill sent it to me. So maybe you saw it, but if not, we'll note for the record. This New York Post coverage of this story. The government is spying on journalists to find leakers. You know that Donald Trump is very anxious to find out who's leaking all of these things, forgetting that he'd been leaking a significant portion of them. But I guess he couldn't find any answers, and so they're going to be monitoring journalists, which I guess I should say again. I mean, this has happened in the past, and there was a similar instance in the Obama administration, and everyone well, you know what? A lot of Democrats were rightly outraged about it. I'm sure that Republicans were outraged about it at the time too, and still tweeting, where's the Democratic outrage about this? And it's like, it's right next to yours. I don't know why you don't see it. There was a ruckus, they note in this piece, 4 years ago when the Associated Press announced that telephone records of 20 of its reporters had been subpoenaed by the Justice Department. Remember that? The government was apparently looking for CIA leaks about an operation in Yemen. Well, a Washington source of mine, this is John Crudell reporting here for the New York Post, tells me it's happening again. The Justice Department has gotten a warrant this time. This is interesting, right? Gotten a warrant from the U.S. Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, also known as the FISA Court, to conduct electronic surveillance of a group of journalists who've been the recipient of leaked information, the source said. The journalists are not the target, according to my source, and I say thank goodness for that. Instead, the Trump administration is looking for the leaker. Who could it be? I don't know if that's any better as a reason for doing this. Okay. Some in the administration are focusing on a retired high-ranking military officer who held important posts in the intelligence service, according to the source. The possibly high-ranking leaker was getting some of his information from people inside the White House who were holdovers from the Obama administration, the source said. Those White House leakers, said to be 3 people, remember, those were the ones that Trump wanted to fire when he got home, I guess, probably. They've either already been fired or soon will be, the source claims. And these cases, I'm told, have been turned over to the Justice Department for possible prosecution. So then you don't really need the wiretaps, do you? Okay. Well, somehow you managed to talk the court into that one, and I guess we'll learn more about that as time goes on, but just wanted to put that one on the record. Let's see. Yeah, that looks like a Friday topic over there. Yeah, we'll have to talk about that as well. Lots more on the Russia front. We'll have to make tomorrow more of a Russia day, I guess. And a couple of other bits of esoterica, I guess, that I've been saving for the end of the week. Let's see. This is an interesting one, although we'll need more time for that one as well, now that I think about it, because it's getting towards the end of the show. This was a good observation. Let's fit this one in. Sahil Kapoor with this tweet from yesterday. I thought this was interesting, and an accompanying Bloomberg piece. We'll see how long it is. He notes, rich Americans are deferring their tax bills in hopes of a Trump tax cut, which mean an earlier. And that's interesting enough by itself, right? People are trying to defer their tax bills, structuring things such that they don't pay taxes on this income until some later point, hopefully, in their view, after Trump delivers on tax cut legislation. He may never be able to, but they're trying to wait until they'll be taxed on it at a much lower rate. But that's interesting for another reason, which he points out in his tweet, because it also means an earlier debt limit deadline as they try. That's right. In order to try and estimate when will we hit the debt ceiling, because that's looming, of course. Various officials have to weigh in, and the Treasury is going to have to give them an estimate on when are we going to hit this thing. Here's how much money we've got in here. Here's how much we expect to come in via the tax system. And, add the numbers together and hopefully don't forget about $2 trillion or whatever along the way, and figure out when are we going to hit that debt ceiling. And it's only going to happen earlier if people defer payment of taxes. So here's the Bloomberg piece. Saleha Mohsin and Christopher Condon. Rich Americans hasten a Trump headache, raising the debt ceiling. The wealthy, little bullet points underneath there, wealthy may defer up to 20% of some taxable income, and Mnuchin wants Congress to act on the debt ceiling by August. No way. Well, we'll see. By August. They're gone for August, of course. Wealthy Americans have put off some of their tax bills this year. No comment exactly on how that's possible, just assume that it is, causing such a pinch to government revenue, which was supposed to go up because of the promise of tax cuts and the tax cuts themselves, causing such a pinch to government revenue that the U.S. could face a default on its debt months sooner than the White House expected. Boing. Look out for that. High-income taxpayers may be anticipating a future tax cut from President Donald Trump, but they may also accelerate a political headache for them, persuading Congress to raise the government's debt limit. The wealthy may have deferred recognizing as much as 20% of their taxable income last year, according to independent estimates, a move that is legal and allows them to delay paying taxes on non-wage earnings, including capital gains. Trump's promise of tax cuts gives richer Americans large incentives to shift non-wage taxable income from 2016 to 2017, said Lucy Dadayan, good guess at her name, I don't know, a senior researcher at the Rockefeller Institute of Government, which of course we learned last week was funded by all of those nonprofit family foundations in the Philanthropy Roundtable Network. Okay, Treasury's monthly budget statement for April showed weaker than expected income tax receipts. The drop in tax revenue is significant enough to alarm top officials, including Secretary of the Treasury Steve Mnuchin, who's urged Congress to pass a clean bill raising the debt ceiling without policy riders by August. White House Budget Director Mick Mulvaney, who doesn't care about anything, said last week the administration may soon announce an earlier debt ceiling deadline, citing the fall off in tax receipts. How could that happen? The Congressional Budget Office will release an estimate of May tax revenues on June 7th, coming up, a highly anticipated report among investors. Debates over raising the debt ceiling became especially politicized under former President Barack Obama. Republicans used the specter of a default as leverage to demand spending cuts and other policy changes. Bills to raise the debt ceiling were commonly passed in the nick of time. Mnuchin began using special accounting measures in March to stay below the ceiling, and he has projected that the Treasury will run out of money in the second half of the year. The stakes are high. Did you know that? Global financial markets risk volatility if there is political uncertainty about the U.S. government's ability to repay its debts, and there is. Failure to take action in time could result in the first ever U.S. default, and that'll be on you, Trumpy. Mnuchin said he would not prioritize debt payments over other government spending in the event the ceiling isn't raised. America's wealthiest may be partly to blame, can you believe it, if the deadline arrives sooner than anticipated. While most people pay their taxes through deductions from their paychecks, richer taxpayers also earn income through the sale of stocks and other assets or by taking profits out of companies, resulting in capital gains. We're having to explain to people now that the rich are different, and here's how. Taxpayers often make their decisions on selling assets based on current tax rates as well as expected future tax rates, among other factors, said Rockefeller's Diane, or whatever her name is. I won't even try it again. Mnuchin in January vowed that a tax cut, part of what he says will be the biggest overhaul since the 1980s, would not benefit the wealthiest Americans, who Trump has said reaped all the benefits of the economic recovery and left lower-income people in despair. That's true. He just doesn't care. More recently, Mnuchin has declined to guarantee that only middle-class taxpayers would receive a cut, saying he may need to make concessions to close a deal with Congress. Even with a Republican-controlled Congress, advancing the timeline for action on the debt limit will be difficult. Lawmakers are already grappling with two complicated and fraught debates, repeal and replacement of Obamacare and the tax overhaul, which is not a separate debate really, even from the healthcare issue, nor is it's even closer in subject matter to exactly what we're talking about, but okay. Both issues threaten to paralyze the Congress, where consensus is already weak and midterm elections loom large next year. Shai Akabas, an analyst at the Bipartisan Policy Center in Washington, said that a reduction in income tax receipts probably isn't enough to significantly hasten action on the debt ceiling. He says they don't see enough evidence that the entire frame that we're talking about has shifted. I don't know why anybody would say that, but okay. A debt limit deal is divisive even within the political parties. Republicans are at odds over whether spending cuts should be a part of any increase. Democrats, whose votes in the Senate are needed to avoid a default, may use that bargaining chip to demand other concessions. What? No way. Do you think they could do that? Some lawmakers are also rankled at Mulvaney, who has downplayed the dangers of a default. And of course, he also insists the CBO is meaningless and maybe its time has come and gone. There's a little bit more here about spooked markets and their worry about the possibility of default while they celebrate by deferring their income and hastening the default. It's all just a tangled mess. Wow, what a tangled web we weave. Well, how about now we hand that web and the weaving and the loom and everything that goes with it over to the guys on the after show, who will pick up the ball on all the other stories we missed today, and there are quite a few. It's Thursday, and that means thank God it's Joe Vidi version of the show. The Portland, Oregon terror attack survivor asks people to stop making him a white savior. Probably not a bad idea. A black professor is forced to cancel her book tour after Fox News fans threatened to lynch her for ripping Trump. Oh dear. Gee whiz. Think we ought to pay attention to things like that? Thank you guys for picking up that story. And the New Hampshire co-chair for Trump's campaign seeks a White House pardon already after he's sentenced to 7 years for his role in the Bundy standoff. It'll be interesting to see how that one plays out. On the last half, they'll be reporting that Jeff Sessions is at risk of being impeached. Good. And Thomas Jefferson's view of Islam continues to matter today. Stay tuned to find out why on the After Show with Wink and Justice right here on Netroots Radio next.
From Daily Kos Radio on netrootsradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
Thanks so much for listening. Yes, we got our final numbers in for the month of May. 106,001 downloads of the show. I don't want to know which one of you screwed up our nice round number, but thank you for doing it. I like being put over the top. Thanks for listening. We'll be back tomorrow to round out the week, and see you then.